Under the invited title of soul manipulation, I've chosen to focus on the class of men that devoted themselves to this activity most tangibly, namely the Psychagôgoi, evocators, or more literally soul drawers, soul leaders, shadowy figures in both the literal and the metaphorical senses. These were manipulators of the souls of the dead. At the oracle of Zeus at Dodona in Thesprotia, petitioners addressed their queries to the god and his local wife, Dione, on lead tablets, one of which, dated to approximately 420 BC, poses the following question. To Zeus of the place and to Dione, they shouldn't use Dorios the Psychagôgos, should they? The question appears to be framed to expect the answer no, but the emphasis within it is otherwise unclear. Is the petitioner seeking Zeus's reassurance that the practice of Psychagôgia, to core, should be avoided, or rather that a particular practitioner of the craft, Dorios, should be avoided? If Dorios was the only Psychagôgos in the offing, the issue would be moot. The petitioner would appear to be at some variance with the they to whom he or she refers. And so we seem to have a difference between interested parties, a dispute within a family, perhaps, about the handling of the ghost of a dead relative. The most crucial aspect of this document is that it establishes, at the risk of stating the obvious, that Psychagôgoi existed in the real world of ancient Greece. A difficult pill to swallow for the unfortunate proponents of the new idea that there was no actual practice of necromancy in ancient Greece, with the phenomenon supposedly being confined to the realm of literary fantasy. I use necromancy here in its ancient and etymological sense of divination from the dead, and by divination I mean the securing of hidden information, not necessarily information pertaining to the future. The literary sources, on which we do otherwise depend for our knowledge of the Psychagôgoi, ascribe two activities to them: necromancy, indeed, and the laying of restless ghosts. The latter activity sometimes, if not always, entailed the former, in that the laying of a ghost could require one to seek vital information from it. The causes of its unquietness or the form of restitution it required in order to achieve quietude. The point is well made by an entry in the Suda, the 10th century AD Byzantine lexicon. Alas, we cannot know where it draws its information from in this case, but we can be sure that the ultimate source is classical. On evocation, Psychagôgia. They, the Psychagôgoi, accomplish certain sorceries with regard to the dead, for whenever they come to the places from where the people who ask them in want them to drive away the ghosts, they come to where those to be subjected to evocation are dead. However, they do not immediately find the exact place, but track it down in the following fashion. They bring along with them a black sheep, taking hold of it either by one of its horns or by its front feet, and they lead it around, standing on its other feet. It follows the dragging very readily, but whenever it comes to the place where the man or woman in question lies buried, there the sheep casts itself down. When this happens, they remove the sheep, burn it in holocaust, that's say burn it up completely, and then, together with certain elaborate sacrifices and spells, they mark off and walk around the place, and they listen to the ghosts, and they speak and ask the reasons for their anger. The situation envisaged may fall between two possibilities. In the first possibility, a body, identity known or unknown, lies hidden in the earth, but presumably without the benefit of due burial that would bring its soul peace. The exact spot is unknown and must be found, but the broader parameters of its location, presumably, are defined. Perhaps they could extend to the full territory of a city. In the second possibility, the field of exploration is a cemetery of marked graves, within which one burial remains, despite appearances unsatisfactory. And the technique is used to discover the identity, to discover the provisional grave, of an attacking ghost that has hitherto remained anonymous or unidentified. A little unexpectedly, perhaps, the Suda does not speak of the actual recovery and reburial of the body. The ghost is to be placated in other ways. The currency in antiquity of the interesting practices described can be broadly confirmed. On the one hand, Diogenes Laertius tells how Epimenides of Crete laid the ghosts of the Cylonians foully murdered in 632 BC by releasing a flock of black sheep from the centre of Athens, the Areopagus, and sacrificing each of them at the point at which they lay down. On the other hand, sacred laws for the laying of attacking ghosts from Selinus, 460 BC, and Cyrene, 300 BC, speak of the need to address the ghost in question. In the latter case, even to call it into a doll and then share a meal with it. In Euripides' Alcestis of 438 BC, Heracles retrieves Alcestis from death himself, the clutches of death himself, for her husband Admetus of Pherai, and restores her to him in full bodily form. Admetus initially fears he may be seeing a ghost, causing Heracles to exclaim that he has not caused him, in performing this service, to become a Psychagôgos. He had not, in other words, called up a ghost from below. An interesting text, but of more immediate interest here is the scholastic, the marginal Byzantine commentary attached to the line, which cites a lost work of Plutarch in explaining that there are some evocators, Psychagôgoi, sorcerers in Thessaly being so termed, who summon up and drive out ghosts. In fact, the Spartans sent for these when the ghost of Pausanias was frightening away people who tried to approach the temple of Athena of the bronze house. That's what Pausanias may have looked like. That's Athena of the bronze house, the miserable remains of it, are visible today. The traditions pertaining to the death in around 467 BC of Pausanias the regent, the victor of the Battle of Plataea, who had delivered Greece from conquest in the great Persian invasion of 480, are complex. But a strand of them helps us to build a scenario in which the Psychagôgoi would have been called upon to deploy similar techniques to those described in the Suda. According to this strand, the body of the great man had been cast out without burial and thrown down the Kaiadas crevasse where the Spartans disposed of their criminals and their unwanted babies. This after he'd been bricked up in Athena's temple and starved to death there, supposedly for attempting to betray Greece to the very Persians over whom he had so gloriously prevailed. In such circumstances, his body would not only have been lost but irrecoverable. We can well imagine the Psychagôgoi taking their stance with their sheep at the top of the crevasse and communicating there with Pausanias' ghost. The terms it demanded for peace had already been stipulated by Thucydides, writing in around 400 BC. The establishment of a pair of bronze statues of Pausanias in the forecourt of the temple where he'd been killed and from which he was now driving people away. To stand for body and soul, perhaps, one for each. Plutarch refers more briefly to the same episode in a surviving text, his Slow Vengeance, where he establishes that the Psychagôgoi, where he specifies that the Psychagôgoi were brought in not from Thessaly, but from even further afield, from Italy. Almost certainly then the Thessalian affiliation of the Psychagôgoi in the Plutarch fragment originates not with Plutarch himself, but with the commentator who's inserted it in support of his explanation of Heracles' use of the term Psychagôgos before Admetus in Thessalian Pherai. Pausanias was a big man, and his death was a big story. And it was inevitably elaborated further in the tradition. From at least the time of Nymphis of Heraclea in the 3rd century BC, the tale of his death became the second panel in a nice responding diptych of ghost stories, with the first panel formed by the tale of Cleonice. After Plataea, Pausanias had been leading the Greek advance against the Persians at Byzantium. Whilst there, he had conceived a desire for a local maiden, Cleonice, and he had had her brought to his bed by night. As she fumbled her way across the darkened bedchamber, she knocked over a lamp. In clattering to the ground, it started Pausanias from his slumbers, his guilty, feverish slumbers, and he lashed out into the darkness with his sword, thinking that assassins had come for him. The girl died, and her restless ghost now began to harry the regent, another Pausanias, Pausanias Periander, writing in the 2nd century AD, tells how the regent travelled to visit the Psychagôgoi of Phigalia in Arcadia in an attempt to escape the ghost's harrying, but all in vain. A parallel account of the Cleonice episode, Plutarch's again, and almost certainly Nymphis in origin, makes no mention of the Psychagôgoi, but supplies us with some interesting contextual details. He tells how the regent had travelled not to Phigalia in his bid to escape the ghost, but rather to the oracle of the dead at Nymphis' own city of Heraclea Pontica on the Black Sea, the modern Regli, a direct coastal sail down the south coast of the Black Sea from Byzantium. Here Pausanias had called up the ghost of the girl in a form with which he was able to communicate, as opposed to the terrorizing, harrying form of the ghost, the attacking ghost. And he'd asked it how he could give the ghost peace. The response, go to Sparta. In other words, the ghost knew that Pausanias was doomed to meet his own death back in his own city and was keen to hasten this along in its desire for vengeance and restitution. The Psychagôgoi, called in to lay Pausanias' own ghost, were, like Epimenides, prepared to travel to the ghost-troubled spot at which they were needed to do their work. That model of activity is also presumed by the Suda. You call in the emergency service and they come to you. However, the tale of the living Pausanias' visit to the Psychagôgoi of Phigalia suggests that the Psychagôgoi could also have a fixed base. The parallel between the functional alternates of the Phigalia episode and the Heraclea Pontica episode might suggest that such a base could be, precisely, an oracle of the dead. But it must be conceded that, just as we hear of no Psychagôgoi at Heraclea Pontica, so we hear of no oracle of the dead in Phigalia. This may make us wonder whether the Phigalia transmitted in Pausanias' manuscripts, Pausanias Periander manuscripts, may be a corruption of Italy. The two terms look remarkably similar when expressed in Greek capitals, as indeed does Thessaly, Thessalia. Given that it was from Italy that the Psychagôgoi were subsequently brought in to lay the ghost of Pausanias in term, as we've seen, and that there was indeed a famous oracle of the dead in Italy, namely that of Lake Avernus. There almost certainly was one oracle of the dead at which Psychagôgoi were based, however, and that was the oracle on the river Acheron in Thesprotia. The Odyssey had identified the place at which Odysseus had summoned up the ghosts of the dead in the Nicaea sequence in Book 11 as a rock at the confluence of which the Thesprotian rivers, the Acheron and the Cocytus, met. And by the time of Herodotus, around 425 BC, the place was recognized as an oracle of the dead, a necromanteion. Herodotus relates the glorious tale of how Periander, the wicked tyrant of Corinth, after accidentally killing his wife Melissa, found that she alone had known the location in which she had concealed some treasure on behalf of a friend. And here's the ghost of Melissa being called up. So Periander sent a messenger to the Acheron oracle to call up the ghost of Melissa and ask her where the treasure was. The ghost summoned up confirmed that she was indeed the ghost of Melissa by revealing in a coded way something that only Melissa's ghost could know, namely that Periander had had sex with her corpse. Before she then demanded a massive tribute in return for the information Periander wanted. To satisfy this demand, Periander stripped all the women of his city of their finery and burned it all in a trench for the ghost. This done, he was at last told where to find the treasure. Writing before 455 BC, the tragedian Aeschylus gave us his own version of Odysseus' consultation of the ghosts at the Acheron in a lost play actually named Psychagôgoi, the play taking its name, as often with tragedies, from its chorus. Some valuable fragments of it survive. They tell us that the consultation took place at what was evidently the marshy Acherusian lake that formed at the confluence of the rivers, that the team of Psychagôgoi appropriately claimed descent from Hermes, the great escort of souls between the upper and the lower worlds, and that they directed Odysseus in this rite, speaking to him in the following terms. Come now, guest friend, take up your stance on the grassy sacred enclosure of the fearful lake. slash the gullet of the neck, and let the blood of this sacrificial victim flow into the murky depths of the reeds as a drink for the lifeless. Call upon primeval earth and chthonic Hermes, escort of the dead, and ask chthonic Zeus to send up the swarm of night wanderers, ghosts that wander by night, from the mouths of the river, and from which this melancholy off-flow water, unfit for washing hands, is sent up by Stygian springs. The dismal and sinister atmosphere of the oracle is beautifully evoked, I think, by these words. The Psychagôgoi of the Acheron oracle may bring us back to the starting point of our journey. As we've noted, the oracle was located in the same region of Greece as the oracle of Zeus at Dodona, Thesprotia. They were around 25 miles apart, hilly miles, but nonetheless just 25 miles apart. So when the consulters of that oracle worried about whether they could make use of Dorios the Psychagôgos, it could well have been that the Acheron oracle was where Dorios was based. To conclude, Psychagôgoi were a real phenomenon in 5th century Greece. And no doubt they'd thrived for some centuries prior to that. They offered both ghost-laying and necromancy, and often it seems necromancy was normally a prerequisite of ghost-laying. Whilst their ghost-laying technique could include the location of the ghost's body in the ground, they didn't need to dig it up in order to achieve peace for the ghost. They could have had fixed bases at which they worked, including oracles of the dead, but they could also, quite understandably, travel to do their work at the places beset by the attacking ghosts. Thank you.
I get to ask you a question when you're done, very briefly. This is my special reward for moderating. Who could be, if I wanted to be a Psychagôgoi, could I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who gets to be one, and how do you become one?
I have, in the course of this little lecture, pretty much given you all the evidence we have for them, and so really, there's nothing more to say. There's nothing more to say. One, in trying to eliminate every last sort of parenthesis to make sure my talk fell within the 15 minutes. I did discuss gender issues. I mean, I'm afraid I'm sorry to say, there's no indication that a Psychagôgos could be a woman. As far as we know, they were all male. But again, the only again historical Psychagôgos of which we have any information is our own little Dorios, and that's it. That's it. But you know, maybe he had a sister Doria, and maybe she did the same thing too. Without being able to explain my reasons for saying this, I do wonder whether the Psychagôgoi did try to evoke the presence of the ghosts they were speaking with for their audience, for their civilian audience, as it were, by themselves taking on ghostly characteristics, maybe long, matted hair, dirtiness, maybe covering themselves in ashes, this sort of thing, the way ancient ghosts could be perceived. I think that might again, it's a complicated argument as to why they might have done that. But I do feel, well, clearly they were putting on a show. And if you ask yourself, how do you put on a show of talking to a ghost that other people can't see? Well, to a certain extent, you have to become the ghost, you know. So that's the closest I can get. But as far as whether you had to be born into the right family, I don't know. I don't know.
So another clear career path is barred to me, tragically. Yeah. But it sounds as if they're also very good therapists of feelings of revenge, desire, frustration. And it sounds as if those sheep should know not to fall down. Yeah. Because after that, it's not good for them. You have to develop your back legs, don't you, if you're a sheep? Yeah.
Yeah. But just to pick up what you said there, I mean, the appearance of a ghost, the belief in the appearance of a ghost is an expression of a crisis of some sort, either personal or civic or local. And the Psychagôgoi come along and they solve your problem. Respect due.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Take a seat. Thank you.